In the nitty-gritty of negotiations inside those halls there, it's very easy to lose sight of the big picture. So we have brought you the big picture out here in the open air, right in the bright daylight where you can't miss the global injustice that's happening. And I'm very proud, but rather alarmed, to unveil it to you now. What does this picture tell us? It's a very powerful story of global injustice. So along here we've got income per capita of countries, and going up the side we've got carbon dioxide emitted per person in a country. What can we see here? The rich countries have extremely high levels of carbon dioxide emissions per person. That's because the way they've industrialized a century of fossil fuel emissions has resulted in high carbon dioxide. They have caused climate change, and they got rich in that process. They've got high incomes. So they are best equipped to cope with the impacts that they've caused. In stark contrast, we've got the least developed countries in the world. They did not cause climate change. They are not responsible at all. Their emissions are extremely low. And because of their low incomes, they are least equipped to cope with the impacts. Yet we know from the world scientists that they are facing the impacts first and worst, with extreme floods and droughts and hurricanes devastating people's livelihoods. That's the injustice that climate change presents us with. And now the question is, what are we going to do about it? What are the rich countries going to do? In 1992, the world's governments committed in the UN Convention to tackle climate change with equity. And we can see at the top, Article 4.4, which very clearly states that the rich countries, known as Annex 2, and it's these countries, they have an obligation to pay for the cost of adaptation in the countries most vulnerable to climate change. That includes the LDCs, the least developed countries, many of the small island states, and many countries in Africa. Have they delivered? No way. These least developed countries have submitted plans called their National Adaptation Plans of Action, calling for the most urgent and immediate needs that they need to fulfill on climate change. What's in those plans? Uganda needs $6.5 million to upgrade its meteorological service so that they know what is happening with the weather, because local farmers can no longer rely on their traditional knowledge to know when to plant their crops. They need top scientific information about what is happening with the weather so they can plan. Tuvalu needs $2 million to plant trees around the coast with the community to prevent further extreme coastal erosion. Bangladesh needs $1.5 million now to help the most vulnerable communities to get safe drinking water, because the water that they depend on is turning salty due to rising sea levels. These are incredibly basic, urgent needs that the poorest people in the world need met now. We estimate that the cost of meeting all these urgent and immediate needs from the 49 least developed countries is $1 to $2 billion. That's a fraction of what rich countries plan to spend at home. And have they delivered? No. To date, rich countries have put just $67 million in the funds specially set up to finance these needs. $67 million is what people in the United States spend on suntan lotion in 1 month. It's appalling, and it's an insult to global justice. And this is not aid. And these are not donors. These are the rich and high-polluting countries who owe compensatory finance to those they've imposed the impact of climate change upon them. Only the Netherlands, among all these countries, has recognized that this is not aid and is committed to providing finance for adaptation above and beyond its long-standing aid commitment. And other rich countries have to follow that lead now. The experience from the least developed countries shows us that the negotiations here about the Adaptation Fund are a worrying sign. We may have the governance of the Adaptation Fund sorted, but what happens if we end up with a perfect structure, but it's puny in size? There is no way that the rich countries are giving involuntary contributions the scale of money that developing countries need. And that's why Oxfam is calling for binding commitments on rich countries to meet their obligation on adaptation finance, just in the same way that they have binding commitments on their obligation to cut emissions. Because the experience of the least developed countries shows that voluntarism does not work, and they have to live up to their commitment to finance adaptation in order to deliver justice in climate change and adaptation for the poorest people in the world. Where's China and India in the graph? Down. Somebody from China is telling me down. Higher. This way, this way. I think from the way that China is portrayed in the Western media, we'd probably think it was somewhere here. And that just shows the way that these rich countries are trying to divert the debate, because in fact, China's here. And that's probably quite astounding to most of us. And then if we want to move to India, even more amazing, India's here. And I think if we put these facts in context, it's pretty clear that we should not be demanding from developing countries to move first and fastest in providing finance for adaptation. It's back to these rich countries who have high emissions and high incomes and an obligation at the United Nations to finance adaptation in the poor countries. Thank you.